I am really excited to introduce the former Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman. He's one of those people who I feel needs no introduction, but here is my very humble and quick attempt. Dan, in addition to being a congressman for 18 years for Kansas, was the Secretary of Agriculture from 1995 to 2001. He now serves as the co-chair of the Global Food and Agriculture Program of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and is the executive director of the Congressional Affairs Program at the Aspen Institute. I just want to share a quick personal story. A few years ago, just after Food Tank launched, Dan invited me to his office for a quick chat here in DC. And he was very kind and generous and seemed to be really excited about Food Tank and said at that time that it was something that he felt was needed and important to create dialogue around food and agriculture issues. And it's not every day that someone like me is told by a former Secretary of Agriculture, someone like Dan Glickman, that what they're doing is worthwhile. So I've carried his sentiments with me, and I'm very grateful and honored for his support and encouragement. Following Dan's remarks, Simran Sethi will be moderating the Beyond Calories, the Need for Nutrient-Dense Diets panel. So now please join me in welcoming Dan Glickman to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. One Danny to the other Danny. It's great to be here. I always tell this story about the two dairy cows grazing along the side of the road, and all of a sudden a milk truck drives by, and on the side of the milk truck is written in big red letters, pasteurized, homogenized, vitamin enriched, good for you. And one dairy cow looks at the other dairy cow and says, kind of makes you feel inadequate, doesn't it? So there are plenty of very great professional people from all lines of work in food and agriculture. I'm glad to be in your mix today. So I talk fast. I've got 10 minutes. I'm going to get 10 minutes worth of talk in that in as fast a time as I can get it. But this gives me an opportunity to talk to a group of great thinkers and deliberate change makers about what I can see happening down in the future. And the first thing I want to talk about is the big picture for a moment. Beyond agriculture, what are we facing in the world today that impacts food and agriculture? Issue number one is Moore's Law, change. Change is happening at a transformational rate in all areas of society, from medicine to agriculture to food to technology. Change is unsettling, and we have transformational change in a disordered world. Makes some people happy, some people unhappy in every line of work. That's a reality. Number two is globalization. It's happening, whether we like it or not. It's got a disparate effect. It creates a chasm in some circles. Some people really benefit from globalization. Some people, particularly in the short term, don't, particularly in the manufacturing sector. It impacts agriculture very directly as well. Third is we're facing this period of extremism, transnational extremism, terrorism, biosecurity, cybersecurity, nuclear security. Fourth is Mother Nature and climate change. We have CO2 levels at levels we've never measured before. Fifth is, and something I've lived with as a congressman, is the polarization in politics, the dysfunction, the rigidity in the American political system, the campaign system that you watch on TV all the time. Let me give you one example. When Lyndon Johnson was Majority Leader of the United States Senate, we had one filibuster. And all that time, it was in 1957 on the civil rights laws. In the last 6 years, we've had 422 filibusters in the United States Senate. Okay, so that's kind of the world we're in. It's a crazy world, and we're trying to do some very positive things, right, Chuck? And so we need leadership, we need resilience, we need innovation, we need collaboration, and those things are all critical. And how does this affect food and agriculture? The reason why I mention it is because oftentimes when you come to food events, they never talk about the big picture of what's happening in the world. We're part of that huge, big picture. We have to think about it as we think about what we're doing. Okay, what are some of the themes? First theme is consumer power. We've never seen a world where consumers have as much power as they now have in the area of choosing what they want to eat, when they want to eat, how they want to eat it, how it's labeled, where it is, how good is it for them. The power relates to marketing, the power relates to retailing, the power relates to production agriculture. I used to be involved in the motion picture industry. I was not a great actor. You never saw me on TV. I was a lobbyist for Hollywood. But there was a movie called Field of Dreams. Remember that movie? And he went outside, and Kevin Costner was talking about building a baseball stadium in Iowa, and the theme was, if we build it, they will come. That used to be the way it was in food and agriculture. If they grow it, if they sell it, we will buy it. The reverse is becoming true now. If we want it, if we like it, if it tastes good, if it's cheap, if it's healthy, if it's labeled the way we want it, all these other things, then maybe we'll buy it. So the power of consumers is a huge transformational force in agriculture. The second is climate and weather change. No industry is more affected than agriculture in terms of the volatility and severity of weather. It really impacts production agriculture and farmers. And climate and weather changes have a lot to do with pests and disease and drought of commodities of all sorts. And it also deals with this precious issue of water shortages, water utilization, which is a gigantic factor in production of agriculture. The third theme is diet and nutrition. There's much more consumer interest. The science is evolving, and the change is very rapid. And a lot of that is being impacted by locally involved agriculture, where people get to see farmers and see the items that are produced. One of my things that I've worried about for some time is the disconnect between medicine and agriculture and food. Very few medical schools teach doctors and other healthcare professionals about nutrition and about prevention. It's beginning to grow. And the science is evolving, and we need much more scientific research into this area of diet and nutrition, but it's a huge factor both here at home and around the world as well. Fourth is the role of science generally, the role of research and development. As research into medicine and the Pentagon and even in the National Science Foundation continues to grow upwards, research in agriculture is falling in real terms. It's a serious, serious problem. I'm talking about public research in our universities, our land grant levels. Private sector research is growing, but we need the basic research into the science of agriculture. And if that continues to fall, as opposed to Brazil and China, which their research budgets are going up rather dramatically, that has a significant factor in the future of agriculture. The fifth issue is trade. Trade is very controversial, particularly in the politics of today, but farmers and American people in agriculture need to be able to sell their products overseas because about 2/3 of the product is consumed domestically and the rest is either sold or it rots or has become a victim of food waste. So trade in agriculture is very important. But trade in other parts of our economy is viewed far less positively than it is in agriculture, particularly if you live in the manufacturing area, and we have to kind of resolve those issues as well. The sixth issue is global food security. So we worry about at home and how diets are changing and how to improve the nutrition, how to improve farm income, how to improve diversity in American agriculture, but we also are concerned about the rest of the world. And Africa, South Asia, the developing world, and how they're going to deal with these issues. The Feed the Future initiative has been a great initiative by this administration, but there are others that we need to be thinking about as well, because these are big parts of the world that can be powerhouses in terms of food production in the future, particularly with new technologies. Recently, I was in Africa, and I was with a group of women farmers. The phone rang, cell phone rang. We were 11 of them. All 11 picked up the phone and answered the telephone. By the way, the reception we were in northern Tanzania. The reception was better than it was in the United States because they have cell towers everywhere, and they've spent a lot of money on them. Government programs. I've been involved in farm programs for a long, long time. A lot of time before a lot of you in this room were born. They served their purpose very well during the Depression, when farmers were probably the worst off economic class in America, but things have changed. The programs are slowly changing. They're giving more flexibility to farmers. You can finally buy crop insurance on non-traditional crops that aren't program crops like wheat, corn, cotton, rice, soybeans. And if you can buy insurance on fresh vegetables and fresh fruits, then you can grow it anywhere. Then it becomes a lot more attractive to raise it everywhere and make it available everywhere. and not just in the parts of the country that currently grow them. But our farm programs need to be modernized with the times of the future, and as I mentioned, a lot of times that runs into my first point about change, because change is difficult for everybody, particularly if you've got a stake in the status quo. I like to quote from the movies a lot because I spent some time there. So some of you remember the movie The Graduate? Raise your hand if you remember that movie. Okay, a few people here that are old enough, with Dustin Hoffman. And remember when he was getting married and his father-in-law comes up to him and he doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. And so his father-in-law gave him the secret sauce. Remember the secret sauce? Plastics. Okay, now we look at that and think, oh my God, it's the chemical industry, it's environmental degradation, it's leaching into the water supply. But then plastics was the secret sauce. I have to tell you, I think the secret sauce today is food and agriculture. I think it's an area where it's more apt for innovation, for creativity, for imagination, at the farm level with new data techniques and technology, at the conservation level with ways to protect our waters and our soils from blowing away or leaching away, producing crops, doing it more sustainably, and at the diet and nutrition level with better diets and better health care. I see this world as just dramatic, positive, changing, and not just involving a few folks. Now, food and agriculture involves everyone, from the smallest producer to the biggest seed company in the world. And so I just encourage you to just take in what you're hearing today. Recognize your power, recognize the significance and importance of food production, of food consumption, of the food industry, not only to our way of life, but also to the national security of the United States and the global security of the world. So best of luck on this conference. I thank Danny and the Food Tank people for inviting me, and if I can ever help any of you, you can find me on one of my either Agree or Chicago Council or Aspen or Bipartisan Policy Center or other websites that are probably too numerous to mention, but most of them do relate to what you're doing every single day. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator, Simran Sethi, author, Bread, Wine, Chocolate, The Slow Loss of Foods We Love.
So much. I am not sure if, I wasn't sure if someone was introducing me, so I'll self-introduce again and say I am the author of the book that was just referenced. I'm delighted to be here moderating this panel. Thank you, Dan, for your incredible lead into this. The reason this panel is so exciting to me is because we're talking not only about nourishing the planet from a sort of externalized level, but it's deeply intimate when we start to look at the ways in which we nourish ourselves. And we have an opportunity to hear from an extraordinary and diverse set of perspectives this morning. We're going to have a conversation among ourselves for about an hour and then open it up to 15 minutes of Q&A. But before we get started, I'd like to just take a few moments to set the stage for this discussion. For millennia, we have made decisions about what to grow and not grow, and what to eat and not eat. And that is what agriculture is. It's a series of decisions that we and our ancestors have made about what we want our food system to look and taste like. But our ability to make these decisions is being compromised in ways that are unprecedented, which is what we are going to be exploring today. While some places in the world are experiencing an increase of diversity in certain parts of their diet, the general trend is towards standardization. Monodiets born of monocultures. And the country that's setting that trend is the United States. The refined carbohydrates, animal proteins, and added fats and sugar that make up the majority of American diets have also become the template diet for much of the world. And this increase in sameness is what authors of the most comprehensive study to date on the diversity and the lack of diversity in our diets and our food supply call the global standard diet. These researchers analyzed 50 years of data from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations on major crops eaten by 98% of the population. And what they found were that diets around the world have expanded in terms of amount, calories, fat, and protein, with the greatest number of our calories now coming from energy-dense foods such as wheat and potatoes. In areas facing food insecurity, this can be a very good thing. But this availability obscures the more challenging truth that globally, foods have become more alike and less diverse. As the amount of food around the world has shrunk to just a handful of crops, regional and local crops, and what's most important to me, the culinary and cultivation techniques that accompany them have become scarce or disappeared altogether. So what these researchers found is that wheat, rice, and corn, plus palm oil and soybeans, are what the world eats now, are what all of us eat now, the same types and the same amount. On a global scale, it's increased our chances of becoming what author Raj Patel, who you'll hear from tomorrow, calls stuffed and starved. Overweight, but starved of the necessary micronutrients because of increased processing of foods and a reduction in diversity in diets. The world overconsumes energy-dense foods, but eats fewer foods that are rich in micronutrients. So while 795 million people are hungry today, over 2 billion people are overweight or obese. And let me rephrase that. While 795 million people are underweight, over 2 billion people are overweight. But they are both, as I just said, stuffed and starved. Both groups suffer from micronutrient malnutrition. I want to say as we're going through this, I don't want us to at any point disregard the fact that hunger and food insecurity are real challenges. Here in the United States, this includes more than 1 in 5 children, a statistic that when broken down by race and ethnicity becomes even more heartbreaking. Almost 40% of African American and 30% of Latino American children are undernourished right here in the United States. And the paradox is, here in the US, we throw 40% of our food away. And for the past 20 years, the rate of global food production has increased faster than the rate of global population growth. The world produces more than 1.5 times enough food to feed everyone on the planet today and to feed the population of 9.6 billion people that we anticipate by 2050. All the while, roughly 40% of our harvest crops are used to feed livestock and produce biofuels rather than feed people. And the reason I wanted to include this in my introductory comments is because a lot of the changes that we're seeing in food and agriculture have been made in the name of feeding hungry people. But in truth, the idea of good food has been reduced to foods that grow abundantly and stand strong in the field and can sustain long journeys and stand strong on supermarket shelves. While these qualities are important, they give short shrift to the many reasons we choose one food over another, regardless of our budgets. It also informs the steady refrain from various players in the food industry that the reason we should settle for inexpensive, marginally nutritious food is because we can't afford anything better. But the challenge isn't simply an issue of availability, it's one of access. Food and the resources required to buy food aren't efficiently or equally distributed. And that is why, ironically, some of the hungriest people in the world are smallholder farmers, the over 500 million people who are responsible for feeding the majority of the world's population. The people who grow food are too poor to buy food. Now, some of the nonprofits, government officials, and businesses who maintain these views, of course, mean well. Hunger is dreadful. People need to eat. But others, especially those who are profiting from cheap food, I think are using poverty as an excuse to keep feeding us food of lower quality and sowing fields full of nutrient-poor monocultures. Our panel is comprised of 6 people who are dedicated to ensuring continued and greater access, not just to food, but food that nourishes us. I am so honored to be joining you all today. Thank you. To my left is Roger Thurow, Senior Fellow, Global Agriculture and Food at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. We also have Bill Telepan, who is the founder, and to his immediate left, I'm trying to not confuse my left and right, the founder and chef at Telepan Restaurant. And going down the line is Mitchell Davis, the Executive Vice President of the James Beard Foundation, Ashley Koff, the dietitian and the founder of Ashley Koff Approved, Spike Mendelsohn, chef and chair of the Washington, D.C. Food Policy Council, and Ari Novy, the Executive Director of the U.S. Botanic Gardens. Thank you all for joining me here today.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks to all of you, and thanks to all of you in the cyber world. We're all so grateful you're here. Roger, I'd like to start with you and have you set the framework of hunger, as I referenced. It's not simply a matter of availability, but what are some of the less understood factors that contribute to food insecurity, and how do they specifically relate to nutrient density?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I also wanted to reference what Danny said in the opening. Really important, these gatherings, that we don't kind of wallow in the problem and the horribleness of what's, and you did a brilliant job in setting it up with all the numbers and statistics, but actually to use these forums to talk about solutions and what needs to be happening and energize people. I think one of the things that's misunderstood, despite the statistics and numbers that you said and the woeful nature of them, is that malnutrition has gone big, it's gone global. Every country in the world is dealing with it in some form. More than half the people on this planet are malnourished in one way or another. And I think one of the things in particular that's misunderstood, and kind of what I've been focusing on, kind of in my latest writing project and my focus, is the crucial nature of nutrition, the impact of malnutrition, particularly in the first 1,000 days of a child's life. So the 1,000 days is from the time a woman becomes pregnant to the second birthday of the child. Good nutrition for the mom and then for the child is so utterly critical in that period for the development of the child. Thank you. Now, I'm from Chicago. Is that a cheesehead hat for the Packers, or I'm a Bears fan, so all right. Just the critical nature of good nutrition in that time for the physical growth of the child, the cognitive development, because it's in that period where the brain is growing most expansively and most rapidly, for strengthening the immune system of the child for years to come, for lessening the likelihood or the probability of chronic diseases later in life. The result of malnutrition, of poor nutrition in that time period throughout the 1,000 days, is that the child then is stunted if you're not physically growing, so stunted either mentally or cognitively. And a really, I think, kind of horrible fact in the world today is that 1 of every 4 children in the world is stunted. It's a madness. It's an obscenity that we have this in the second decade of the 21st century. My mantra as a journalist is outrage and inspire. So this is kind of the current outrage that I'm focusing on. Is this 1 in every 4 children in the world is stunted? Stunting is a life sentence of underachievement and underperformance. It's a cost not only to the individual, a stunted child becomes a stunted adult, a cost to the family. Just to climb out of poverty is that much more difficult. A cost to the country, to the whole world, and this opportunity cost of what the stunted child might have accomplished for all of us if they weren't stunted. And so one of the things that I think is a tremendous lack of understanding is that a stunted child anywhere in the world is a stunted child everywhere, and a lost chance of greatness for one child is a lost chance of greatness for all. So it's that the understanding that 1,000 days is so critical, and that nutrition is everywhere in international development. It's the cornerstone of development, but it's nowhere in development strategy and planning, and that's got to change.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is so critical. I want to build on this, Ashley, and ask, when we sort of look at this problem of feeding the world, of feeding this population of 9 billion we anticipate by 2050, you had mentioned that it's something that we should actually reframe. So I think I love the fact that, Roger just talked about, like, this isn't just about the whole life trajectory. There's certain junctures that are very important. Can you talk a little bit about how we should feed the current population better to reduce avoidable diseases and how we can scale that to 9 billion?
Yeah, I think the opening of this, and even coming off of Dan's talk prior, the other Dan, we can feel a little bit, I don't know if anyone here is like stressed out or just, frustrated or any of these, which I also know impacts our digestive system and impacts all of our health, et cetera. So let's hopefully have a moment of positive. I'm going to disagree with something Dan Glickman said, which may not serve me well in the future. However, we don't need more science. We do not need more nutrition science. You were talking to somebody who thinks science is so unbelievably cool and interesting. It is informative, it is illustrative, there's a lot of great things about science, but we are at this awesome point today where we know what better nutrition is, and we know what better nutrition isn't. And I think what we need to do, and to the point of what Roger was talking about, is go about the business of simplifying and communicating and creating access for better nutrition. And one of the things that I consistently see, and I'll get to that in a moment, I will start off with the fact that I began my career on Madison Avenue at an advertising agency for a global food brand. So this is a mea culpa moment. I was advertising Kellogg's Raisin Bran. I started Smart Start Sugar Smack cereal. And I remember sitting in a room having a conversation with a lawyer. It was also the first time I remember meeting a dietitian, even though I came from a family of physicians, and the brand folks. And we all talked about what could we do with Kellogg's Raisin Bran because it was a super soggy old person cereal, and we had to make it relevant to have that growth. And we talked about it, and we went back to the research, and we said, what can you do with this? And lo and behold, one of the things that we stumbled on was, did you know that Raisin Bran delivers more energy than any other cereal that was currently on the market? Huh. Well, suddenly the dietitian thought about it, and she said, you know what? I think that's true. The lawyer said, that's totally true. The consumer advertising person said, that's awesome, because what people are looking for in the morning is energy. Why did Kellogg's Raisin Bran have more energy than any other cereal on the market? It wasn't just Kellogg's Raisin Bran, it was Raisin Bran. It has more sugar because you have to put sugar on the raisins and you have to put sugars on the flakes so that the moisture from the raisin doesn't make the flakes soggy. That all happens in the bowl. And from that, we created our energy positioning for Kellogg. It wasn't 2 scoops of raisins anymore. It was 2 scoops of raisins delivers you more energy. And that was 1995. And what we've seen in that time period all the way up to today is marketing and messaging around nutrition that is really keeping us, we're in our own way from knowing what better nutrition is. Better nutrition is really simple. It's not, is an almond better for you than a cashew? It's that we're better off eating almonds and cashews than we are eating puffs and flakes of almonds and cashews. Or we talk about, that wheat and potato are grown, and those actually aren't meant to be nutrient poor. A potato can be one of the most nutrient-dense foods that you can eat. It's awesome for you. You get potassium from it. I'm the dietitian saying eat the potatoes, but don't eat the potato puffs or don't eat the highly processed potatoes. Or when we talk about farming, let's encourage the diversity of the farming there. So one of the reasons I say all of this and bring it to the marketing part is that I think that how are we going to feed 9 billion people in the future has actually become a marketing proposition that is being used to justify a quantity production path as opposed to a quality and one that is rooted in better nutrition. And I think that is, I'm very clear, we are not feeding people for better health today. If we do what we are doing today and try to do it for 9.6 billion, we will not make it because we will have been bankrupt from the healthcare costs and the healthcare needs. And also we know that our farming likely wouldn't sustain that. So I think when we talk about a reframing, what we really need to do today is figure out those markers of access, communication, education, teaching skills, how do you teach people to cook or prepare things, and how to get them to get better nutrition today so that we can replicate that, we can scale that. That's all we really need to do to accomplish into the future, is figure out a workable model today that we can then scale to the 9.6 billion in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so powerful what you're getting at, which is narrative. And that's what I was trying to sort of debunk in the beginning, is like, this is what we've been told is the truth, but actually it's not. And it's juicy and it's delicious and it's diverse. And what we see in the field is what we see in the gut microbiome. Like, these things aren't separate. And we have such great opportunity here. But I want to just speak to the point that you said around simplifying information. And this is, Mitchell, I want to bring you into this conversation because access to information is key, but it's also strangely lacking. I mean, it's kind of like this notion of an abundance of food, but there's nothing to eat. And I just want to cite something I read the other day that kind of terrified me. A poll of over 4,000 Americans that was conducted just a couple of weeks ago by an institute called Civic Science echoed the results of a Food Information Council Foundation survey. And it showed that 1/3 of those polled indicated that chemicals in food was the most critical food safety issue, and that preservatives and chemicals are a greater health concern than added sugar, saturated fat, and added sodium. So that speaks to, I think, a real information gap. And Mitchell, as someone who is self-described as a food systems change advocate, who do you think, and maybe this is not the best way to frame it, but you can reframe it in a positive way, who's to blame? Who's to blame for this overwhelming lack of information, right? Where are the opportunities, or is this like, is it a glut of incorrect information, or is it, or is it a lack of information?
Well, to pick up, thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here, and to pick up on what Ashley was saying, I couldn't agree more. I actually don't think there's a lack of information or a lack of science. I think that one of the problems with the food movement, if you'll grant me that there is one, that's a whole other conversation, is that people expect information to cause behavior change or cultural, even more importantly, cultural change. And we haven't seen that work anywhere. I mean, look at the political environment we're in right now. Look at, the world is round, the world is flat. Information, it's great. We need it. We need people to make decisions based on it. But in order to change cultural behaviors, I think we're kidding ourselves if we think we just need more or better information. There's a lot of it. There's too much of it. I can't even keep up with my Twitter feed about not useless things, let alone important things. And so, to me, one of the pieces we forget in food, whether we're talking about global security, food security, hunger, nutrition density, is we categorize it as an object outside of our culture or the world that we make. And food is so important. And even the concept of diversity, I think we're kidding ourselves. I think you would poll the average American person and they would think, and they would be right to say, we have the most diverse food of anywhere in the world. I just lived in Italy for 8-9 months, and you get a lot of Italian food. And the Americans with us are like, is there anything besides pasta here? Of course, it's a different sense of diversity. When you go into a Bed Bath & Beyond, it looks like they have 1 million things, but they actually just have 1 million of 3 things. And we, for us, and that's nothing against you, Bed Bath & Beyond, I'm there all the time. But, just because you pile it to the ceiling doesn't mean there's diversity. And so I think we have to frame the question in a cultural context a little bit better. It's one of the reasons at the James Beard Foundation we're emphasizing the role that chefs can play as change advocates, because chefs deal with more food than most anybody in the food system, even in corporate food, will ever see. Just on a day-to-day basis, it comes in, it's transformed, it goes out. And they feed people, certainly a category and a class of people who can afford to be there, but they understand the way food works in a cultural moment. And I think that we have to infuse and recognize that cultural connection we have to America, an America that means abundance. To be American, that means the availability of every kind of food we could ever have, even if it's all based on corn. It looks like it's different, it tastes like it's different, all those sorts of things, and we can't lose those. So to me, the information we need is the introspection to define what it means to be American vis-a-vis food, and find a way to help change that, so that taking away, which is a very un-American thing, not having a sense of agency or decision-making power is a very un-American thing, and finding a way to fuse what it means to be American with the better decisions about food. So it's not so much more information or new information, but it's using that information to create a cultural shift. We think chefs and the culinary community are part of that shift because of the role they play, but it can happen on an individual basis. It can happen just by going to another, having a meal in a different type of restaurant and seeing how food means something different there. So to me, the information piece is a little bit of a red herring. We need it. We need to get it out. It needs to be accurate to the extent that it can be. But people are just tuning off. It's too much out there. Let's just forget that and have dinner.
I love it. I love it. I think what I'm hearing is move away from information and embrace identity. Like we are what we eat.
Bingo.
Anna LaPay said this a couple years ago, when we eat what we are. And I've just stayed, I've lingered on that. And I do agree with you that chefs are playing such a tremendous role now in ways that are unprecedented. So this is the perfect lead in, obviously, to the chefs on the panel. Let's start with you, Bill. Okay. If you could talk about the role that both restaurants and consumers play in promoting responsible food choices. And I'd love your take also on affordability, because this is also one of those things that comes up, like, oh, well, how can we afford to do this?
Well, I think, chefs have always played a role in some sort of food movement. I mean, if you look back at the mid 80s to early 90s with the green markets and the organic movement, chefs were the ones who really brought that out, demanding it, making it more available, asking for more diverse products from farmers, who then feed them to consumers at their restaurant, who see them and then are like, oh, I want to bring this home with me, so where do I find it? And then they find it at the farmer's market and buy it. And now you're seeing organic sections at at large food stores that you never saw before. I'm seeing customers. When I first became a chef back in the mid '90s, on the Upper West Side, nobody knew what salsify was. Now salsify's available at Aristides. So there's so chefs, I think, were the ones who led that, and I think now chefs are playing an advocacy role where we're asked to. We talk a lot about waste. We talk a lot about children's nutrition. We talk a lot about obesity, and I think we're out there. I mean, I'm here today. I mean, talking about this stuff, and I think we're the ones who start it in the sort of the food movement area. And then it gets to the consumer, because at my restaurant I work in schools with a program called Wellness in the Schools, and so I have a lot of people who talk to me about that at my restaurant. So they become aware that some of these people send their kids to private schools who have great kitchens in their schools, but they don't know about that 75% of New York City school children are at or below poverty level, that are eating school lunches and they're nutrient poor. So but that movement started in 2010 with the Chefs Move to School, Michelle Obama talking about it a lot. We became part of that, and now we're starting to see a change in school food and them wanting to have more nutrient rich foods for kids, knowing that we talk a lot about how kids are need at an early age, what you were saying before, but so chefs really can talk about those products and or talk about things that they and bring that to the consumer on a daily basis, because we're in the restaurants talking about, we're demanding it, and therefore I think the consumers pick up on that.
Well, so when I go to a restaurant, I don't hear all of that information. I just see food on a plate and I eat it.
But it's through that food,
yeah.
And then the conversation starts with the staff member, with the waiter. We talk a lot about it at our meetings at the restaurant. And so they get that information too, and then I sometimes go into the dining room and make that connection. Or
always lucky on it. Yeah.
Yes.
So as eaters, what should we be requesting / demanding when we're sitting down? I mean, because restaurant is a broad term, right? I mean, we're talking about TGI, and no offense, but the continuum is TGI Fridays all the way to Telepan, and not everyone is. Not every chef is like visiting the farmers markets and what have you. Right. But I'm wondering, it is such, no one goes out to dinner or out to a meal like out of sadness. I mean, or I shouldn't say no one, but most of us are going to celebrate the end of the week or something special. It's a place of joy and an opportunity to get people when they're happy. Well,
I think the average consumer should start thinking about cooking again
so not to come to your restaurant.
Of course they want to go there. They're going to see how bad they're at doing it. No, but I think we want them to start cooking again. We want them to start demanding real products. Processed food has been a big problem and has been probably a big part of why obesity has risen over the last 34 years. So I think that the chefs demand real products. Consumers are learning about it through us, and they're want it to be available for them, and to talk about our affordability. If we're talking about like micro, shiso leaves, those are expensive. But I think basic things like onions, potatoes, carrots at farmers markets, and are they're pretty well priced, and you have and they last longer because they're fresher.
Spike, do you want to come into this conversation? What is there anything else that you carried? I want to ask, like, as a restaurateur and also wearing your hat as the DC Food Policy Council representative. Let's talk about restaurants for a second. Is there anything that you would add to what Bill said?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Bill said, I totally agree with. Yeah. But as chefs, we find ourselves in a very interesting position these days, whereas you just said yourself that you just walk into the restaurant and order. So you innately have a certain trust with that chef or with that restaurant that you don't even discuss. You don't even talk about that in your head. Like, should I trust? Should I not trust him? You go in and you eat. So I think chefs have been in a very important position lately where we can be advocates of good food because people really trust us with their food system. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much.
So I was sitting in Blue Hill. I wrote a book. I celebrated at this fancy restaurant in New York City called Blue Hill. Dan Barber is the chef. He's an incredible human being. He's done so much for diversity. He's done so much to really recognize the true cost of food. And I think about contrasting it. Let's go back to my sort of big broad reference around restaurants. And this is something that Mitchell had brought up in some of the conversations we've had earlier around this notion of access. And how do we pay the true cost of food? How do we pay the true cost of the labor that went into creating the food and reconcile the fact that means a lot of people aren't going to have that opportunity?
Well, I also think, we name restaurants like myself, like Bernays, Telepan, Blue Hill, and then you're also referencing restaurants like TJ Fridays and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think we're in a new era, which I think we can all agree on, that there's a fast casual space right now that's kind of taking over the place. And lots of young chefs, older chefs that have been around forever are developing fast casual concepts, which innately really help out that whole entire food production, where we can give value to a customer, we can have more limited menus so we don't carry such a huge inventory, and we don't spend all those high costs on servers and bartenders and such. So I think that whole new era of restaurants, let's talk about Jose Andres and Beefsteak, what he's done with that one restaurant. And it's one restaurant and he's raised $9 million to open up across the country. I mean, that really says something, to where we're heading. So,
Thank you.
May I add something
Of course,
to the
yeah.
question? I think sometimes we forget that there are decisions made at every business, at every juncture, to spend money in some ways and not in others, to make money by cutting back in certain things and not in others. Certainly, your client spent a lot more money for you as an advertising marketing agency than perhaps they did thinking about ways to, improve the environmental impact of the brand that went into the Raisin brand. And so I feel like if we just assume it's going to stay the same way and we're going to make the same decisions, we're going to get to the same conclusions and the same solutions. If we change the emphasis we put on them, we could do that in a heartbeat. It doesn't. We have folks like Jeff Dunn and other people to be there, but I think we're sometimes stuck in this idea that this is the model we have, and without breaking, destroying, blowing up, all the sorts of things, those metaphors we use that are really scary, we can also just change our minds or change our decisions. And so from a restaurant right up to the biggest food company, I think that is within our grasp and doesn't require evolution. It just requires a different decision.
And we're seeing it. You look at, General Mills just bought Epic, and so they're producing meat bars, right, from this cute kids in Austin, Texas, who are like, we thought General Mills was the devil, now they're our business, So that part's amazing. And the interesting thing in 1995 was when we came up with that better energy or more energy, not even better energy. I was on a global project, and everywhere else in the world, Canada, Australia, London, all improved the quality of the Raisin brand, i.e. more fiber, less sugar, et cetera. And what we sold in the States was more the same exact product with a different message. So I think that you're absolutely right. And I think what we see with restaurants also is more of a communication that's lining up with, hey, consumers, we're not telling you what you need to do. We're talking to you in the same language of we respect what you know and you're looking for. And we're bringing
making
that
it
forward.
culturally relevant and
Absolutely.
appropriate.
Yeah.
And this brings me, I want to have you put on your other hat,
Sure.
the Food Policy Council hat for a second. In that role, you've done work to promote urban agriculture. This is right here in beautiful Washington, D.C. Can you talk a little bit about the role that has played in improving food quality and that not only geographical access, but that cultural access to
Sure.
nutritious foods?
Yeah, unfortunately, right now, food production is handled by a handful of huge corporations right now. And it's backed by political clout as well, which is a huge problem. It also prevents farmers from growing nutritious crops and making available really great access food to people in supermarkets. So what we have is the political, agricultural politics has been taken over by lobbyists, right, which are representing huge corporations. And what's happening is you have a lot of small farmers, small food processors that are losing their jobs, and they're forced to drive to go to the city to make a life for themselves. So I think the urban agriculture is a huge thing. And I was in Milan, and the whole entire expo was, one of the things I found most interesting is you had a huge international expo, and every single pavilion and country was putting its best foot forward, and most of it was all about urban agriculture and how they're, developing new innovative ways to grow food, and whether it's milk crates or other things. I thought that was a really interesting thing. So as far as the Food Policy Council is concerned, it makes up a couple different working groups. One is urban agriculture, one is sustainable procurement, one is food access in food deserts, and the other is jobs, right? So the focus, you have great organizations like DC Greens, Arcadia that have been paving the way for that thought process. So I think that's really important also because people get their hands more on food, they can see food growing, they can understand a little bit more. There's an education process there. There's like, oh, I can take this home and cook it. I mean, it's really a full circle, and I also do agree. I mean, people should go out to eat, but I always encourage people at least once a week to cook for a group of friends, or to cook for themselves or their families or something. You need to have balance, and you need to have an understanding of the whole entire thing. So.
Absolutely, and it's agency, right? It gets back to like the power and the investment in what you eat. This is an intimate commodity. We're taking this into our body, and that's just one more opportunity to make that personal. Have you found with the urban gardens, and I'm so delighted that Karen kicked this off this morning, but that people, that's also about growing something that people are more familiar with. There's often this conversation around food deserts. It's like, well, it's not enough to just put the expensive, the food in the place, but it's also really about making sure that that food feels accessible to people. If they're not eating kale and that wasn't part of their culture, part of my culture, it was a leap. So how do you see some of that changing when the gardens are closed? I see some of that changing.
I think you need to have both sides. I think people need to be introduced to new ingredients that they haven't had, because if you're only eating, a certain amount of ingredients in your household, then that's all you're consuming. You're really not helping the system by having a plethora of ingredients in your household, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas we have to grow so much more to produce the demand of, let's say, people just want zucchini or eggplant and things that are common to them. So I also think educating people on having a plethora of ingredients is really important, but there's steps you have to take to get there. You have to earn their trust, right? I also think municipal governments can play a huge role, in this process as well, right? Right now they can either choose to act as a barrier, right, and prevent us from doing the things that we'd like to do. They can choose to work hand in hand with us to have effective change. But most importantly, I think, is that they need to really choose to inspire innovation within the food system. You have programs like Produce Plus, for instance, a very innovative program, doubling your dollars at farmers markets. Mm-hmm. Very successful. Mm-hmm. You have the school lunch programs that is also really successful. So it's really important that we get them on board, and that's kind of what I think is very interesting about the Food Policy Council, is that we have a direct line to the stakeholders, and we also have a direct line to the restaurateurs, the farmers, the food producers. So if we can get everyone under this piece of legislation that's backed by government, I really think in the future we can have effective change. And you see it with the LA Food Policy Council, you see it with the Baltimore Food Policy Council, you see it with the BC, you were telling me BC has a huge emerging Food Policy Council. I think it's going to be a really important thing for years to come, and I think that is really what's going to eventually push the government to do change. So.
Thank you. Ari, you have been so very patient. And your work ties right in again to how we bring this up close to people. So can you talk a little bit about how the Botanic Gardens are working to help people connect plant science and agriculture to what's on their plates? Because I think for a lot of people that feels like the most distant relationship.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here. I'm a plant scientist by training and an educator, a botanist, and I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be here. This is an optimistic moment for me because I can tell you that in my community of informal education about plants and plant science, we've been speaking for decades about, we have a term for being ignored called plant blindness, that people just don't care about plants. There are papers written about it. We will drink beers and lament about plant blindness. And you know, wonderful people.
Green in the beer.
Right, I mean, here we go, and people care about beer, but plant blindness. But really, this movement, what's going on with people caring about food, the people here, the people watching, has created an opportunity for those of us who have been dying for a space to get into in an educational sense, to relate plants as the foundational building blocks of the food supply to us in our daily lives is just an enormous, enormous opportunity. And so I've just been heartened and warmed by the fact that I'm even sitting here, so thank you for that. As far as patience is concerned, yes, I work for Congress. So I am very, very patient. The exciting thing that the gardens can do is is twofold. One is that there are a network of public gardens and botanical gardens throughout the entire world, not only the United States, really thousands throughout the world, thousands within the United States. And they are strategically located where the people are. And many of us have been engaging in active horticulture for hundreds of years. The United States Botanic Garden, which is, I'd like to say, the closest building to the US Capitol, which is a really wonderful honor for an institution, has been growing plants both in greenhouses and outdoors since 1850. So we are people who know how to grow plants and demonstrate and show them to people. And there's a renewed vigor that we get to approach that mission with when we get to connect those plants to really important things that are happening out in the world. This is, in many ways, a return historically to what gardens do. The first botanical gardens, established at least in the European tradition, essentially during the Renaissance in Italy, were gardens of the demonstration of useful plants, medicinal plants, nutritional plants, and things like that. And over time, with the Victorian period and the fascination with the exotic, there was a focus change. And then later in the 20th century, we began to focus mostly on conservation and trying to relate the urban environment to the vast lands and species out in those lands that need conservation. Well, it's usually shocking for people to find out that 51% of the land of the United States is agricultural land. And so and that's planted land. So there's a tremendous role for gardens which are located in the urban environment, in the urban matrix, and have built up communities around them to take this knowledge of how to grow plants and how to demonstrate them to the public and connect not only the natural lands that are out there, but the planted agricultural lands that are out there. And I love quoting the great ecologist Dan Jansen, who said the world is a garden and we're all its gardeners. And it really, at the level of impact that human beings are having globally, there is no piece of land that we don't touch in one form or another, and actually quite significantly. And so there's just this wonderful opportunity for us at Gardens to reach out, grow plants in an agricultural context with agricultural messaging, and begin to elucidate instead of obfuscate the role that plants are playing in providing the nutrition that's up there. And for specific examples, a couple of years ago, the US Botanic Garden did an exhibit called Amber Waves of the Rain, where we focused on the growing of wheat. And we showed not only 30 different varieties of wheat to show people that, oh my God, not all wheat looks the same, but also the 6 major classes of wheat that are grown throughout the United States, what products they go into. It's a different type of wheat that makes croissants relative to biscuits, relative to Oriental noodles, relative to Italian-style noodles, and also the ancient grain progenitors that were bred, in some cases thousands of years ago, to create those things. And so showcasing that, celebrating that diversity, celebrating that history, engenders a passion and an excitement that really people need to have in order to translate information, which is of great abundance, into action.
And it forges that relationship. That is so beautiful. I am appalled that we have so little time left. We have so many questions. I could spend days with you. I'm going to ask each of you to respond to something that you've heard on the panel. I apologize, we're not getting to question number 2. We just aren't going to have those moments right now. But respond to something that came up for you, and maybe share next steps. We can just do like a minute to 2 minutes for each person to kind of talk about also something that we can take away, anything that you think is actionable that we can go home and work toward manifesting right now. So Roger, I'll start with you.
Thanks. I think one thing that we've heard pretty much from everybody is kind of this aspect of knowledge and information. And so in my reporting on the 1,000 days, and so what I did is I followed, for the book called The First 1,000 Days, which is out on May 3rd, so it's a good Mother's Day gift. Hint, is I wanted to bring the 1,000 Days to life. So what I did was I followed moms and their children through the 1,000 days in India, Uganda, Guatemala, and in Chicago. A couple of moms on the south side. Basically Chicago to say, look, it's not just a problem over there somewhere, it's also really crucial for us. But what I found, kind of the commonalities across all these countries and these moms and the families and the kids were really striking. And I think one of the great commonalities is probably one of the greatest cravings of moms during their pregnancy is for knowledge and for education. And that I found everywhere. And so, and particularly the nutritional knowledge. What should I be eating myself? How does that impact the child as it grows in the womb and then later once the child is born and the nutrients through breastfeeding? This kind of quest for knowledge then, and we all know kind of the same knowledge is power. Knowledge without the ability to act on it, then knowledge becomes a burden. And what I saw everywhere in the reporting is that poverty then becomes this trump card on the knowledge. And Spike, when you said kind of one of the planks of the council is jobs. I mean, our food system and the changes and reframing that needs to go through, it also then needs to be in conjunction with society, with the economic status of people, because if you're not able to access to act on that knowledge, to afford the foods and the nutrient dense and the nutrient rich foods, that then becomes a burden. I know what I'm supposed to eat and what I'm supposed to do. And at one stage of the reporting, everywhere I was hearing from all the moms, do you know how expensive apples are? And so I was looking into that, and in India at that time, 1 kilo of apples was 150 rupees. The daily wage for a day laborer was 100 rupees. A day and a half labor for a kilo of apples then puts it beyond the realm of them. And then you start looking at the statistics and you see that the energy, calories, food, they become cheaper over the past decades. Whereas the nutrients, the iron, zinc, vitamin A, B12, all these things that are so important, the foods that contain them then have become more expensive. And so that is just all that then is all part and parcel of the food system that we're talking about. So,
and that's a whole conversation around subsidies and how those prices get to where they are, which we'll have to do at the next food tank.
Precisely, right.
Bill?
Well, I think, again, it's about information, but education, I think getting the education to all about nutrition education, getting physical education back into the daily life. I think people need to know about that, and I also think that what I'd like to see is elimination of food deserts, getting access of good, nutritious, nutrient-rich food to everyone is what I'd like to see. That's one of our next actions.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll go back to the role that all of this plays into formulating who we are and what it means to be American. And if we ask ourselves the questions about our food, about our information, about how we treat others and who has access to what, and we say, does that who we want to be? I think that's an important question we sometimes forget to ask. And so I think that's that mindfulness of what we do and what that says about who we are, I think is a really important connection for people to make to help change.
Yeah, and I think with the information, I would still come to the quality, focusing on the quality of information. So I think it's totally awesome if you're engaged in, especially for anyone here that's in communicating or at home communicating about nutrition, you really want to hold yourself accountable to, am I communicating better nutrition? You could have a very healthy life and never eat an apple. And I think that's a really important point. Millet and some of the grains that are indigenous to these cultures have nutrients that would help infants thrive, that would help in the prenatal space. And we've got to end plant blindness. So we really have to work on that piece. At the same time, I was just at Natural Products Expo and a dietitian came up to me and said, have you seen the first veggie milk? And I was like, okay, this is weird, but I'll go check out what veggie milk is. And somebody I respected, and I went over and looked at veggie milk, which is popular in Canada and is now making its way to the States. And I read the back of the box, and it was pieces and parts of potato and pea protein isolate and all stabilizers and added, calcium, etc. And so while there was some merit, I guess, to calling it veggie because of the potato and pea part, We have plant blindness, but then we also have plant really wrong. And I think that it's this nutrition whiplash that we're creating that is causing all of us, I mean, we say it with enthusiasm up here, but we are creating such stress that the body literally can't, in the heads of people who don't have access to certain things or who have tons of information and are sitting there shaking in my office just saying like, I just don't know if I should eat avocado, and it's like, hold on for a second, like your digestive system hasn't worked for 10 days, So I think that when we look at health, we really have to focus on simplifying, and the answer really can't lie in more information and whether that's, more places for that information, but it should certainly lie in quality plants and ending plant blindness. So thank you for that phrase that I will now borrow. Yeah, totally. I'm owning it. Yeah, I mean, I'll trademark it. Yeah. Yeah.
Not before me.
Right. You can trademark that. I mean, I'll give him credit. Ooh, that was such a slip. I didn't mean I would trademark it. I thought I was giving credit for it. That's right.
Yeah,
and I want to come to the
it.
botanist beer drinking events here in DC, so please let me know. Yes.
Can do.
Great.
Thanks, Ashley.
I'll just keep it short because I saw the Q&A sign.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from everybody out here. The DC Food Policy Council is a brand new legislation. It's about 6-7 months old, and we were really looking for support from everyone in the food system. You can visit dcfoodpolicy.com and you can see when we're going to hold meetings and these think groups, and you can be part of the process. It's open to the public. And we really encourage everyone to bring your ideas and help move this thing along because, like I said, we have a direct line to the stakeholders. I really think we can have effective change with the DC Food Policy Council. So.
There's not much more I can say. End plant blindness. It's really just seeing through the system. So I am safe and secure right now because I'm in physical contact with plants. Cotton. And I know that, and that makes me feel strong, empowered, and warm and soft.
Yeah.
Quite literally. And the same is true for the food that she eats.
Oh my God, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so now we have time for questions. The shorter your question, the longer the answer. If there's someone specific you want the question addressed to, please name them in your question. The microphones are down toward the front. Oh, no, we have two wonderful people with microphones in their hands.
They're on the move.
They're on the move.
Cotton t-shirts with end plant
We have
blindness.
one wonderful
I wanna see
person
it.
with a microphone in her
Maybe
hand.
with shades.
Awesome.
I'll try to be one of you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for a great panel. I wanted to ask Mr. Thurow, I'm excited about your new book on the first 1,000 days. What is your next project? What are you working on next? Thank you.
Yeah, a good question. I realized how long the 1,000 days were when I was in the midst of the in the midst of the project. Hoping still on this theme, kind of trying to do these books on hunger in the 21st century. This is my third one, so I call it my Real Hunger Games trilogy. So if they're kind of all packaged together, that would also be marketing tips on that.
Yes.
It might be something on, and I'm really focused on kind of narrative storytelling, so that the books kind of have this kind of novelistic feel, and that I'm hoping that as one comes to care about the characters in the book, you come to care about the issues as well. So it might be something on climate change, and kind of the people, the farmers of the world are on the front lines. They're kind of the canaries in the coal mine of this. They're feeling the climate change and the impact, and how are they adapting, and why that adaptation is so important for all of us. Because if they're not being able to adapt, then kind of heaven help all of us. I think, but something else. If anybody has suggestions, that'll be good.
Next question.
Hi there, my name's Joanna, and I love everything you're saying about nutrient-dense food, but the reality of nutrient-dense food is it takes a lot more time investment to prepare at home oftentimes. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to tackle the issue of preparing nutrient-dense food more at home at a time when we have two-parent households where two parents are working and people feel they're busier than ever.
So I think that's an absolutely critical myth that we have to debunk right here and now, which is nutrient density is in the quality of the food. So what the extent to which you want, and I'll let the chefs and some of the others jump in on that part, but when we, and it's not just you, I hear this all the time, the nutrient density is going to be inherent in the food, and so then it's teaching people to say there's a really fast option, which is you can cut up the apple. I'm just all about the apples right now. Or you can have salmon burgers in your freezer and you can make the salmon burger, or you can have quality eggs and you can make the eggs instead of these fake eggs and do it that way, or you can grab the almonds as opposed to, in that space. So I think the nutrient density is a point about the quality of the food, not what we have to be able to create. So I borrow from IKEA in this one, which is you don't have to ever cook, you can just do some assembly required, and that is putting peanut butter on an apple. It's fast, it's easy, and if the peanut butter is good quality, great, and if the apple tastes good, awesome. So that would be my part.
And I'm also in a household where we're 2 working people, and even though I'm a chef, but we try to we really think about it. We plan ahead, and you have to put some thought into it. And on Sunday when I go shopping, I come home and I buy different veg, and I just cut them up and I put them into a bag, and they're all about the same size, and that gets cooked throughout the whole week and at different stages, and you could do many things with it. But it's about planning and being ready and making, doing something that you could freeze and take out, like she said, the salmon burgers or chili or bolognese sauce or something that's, really, but having the vegetables available and making it easy for yourself. But it does take planning, but you have to make the effort. And I always tell people that, what else are you going to do? Watch TV. Yeah, I put a TV in your kitchen, so and don't miss the show. But it takes a little effort. Yes.
I also think we're like in such a foodie world these days that educating yourself on cooking techniques, just a little bit of it in the household is really important, right? Like how long do you boil your vegetable for, or how long do you cook the asparagus for in the oven? All those things really matter when you're trying to get nutrient-dense ingredients into your system. So, educating yourself about cooking techniques, not only the knowledge of ingredients and food, but the cooking process is a huge thing. So,
I would just add, I've written 6 cookbooks. I am not a professional chef, although I cook well, and there is no food culture in the world that doesn't have food you cook quickly from scratch that is delicious. And we have a myth, I agree, it's a total myth. I have this game with my husband. I can make dinner before the takeout delivery arrives. Every single time with ingredients at home. And I'm not, it's not an Iron Chef, like chopping as fast as you can thing. Because we fool ourselves that we're busier than ever, but if you look in history, in ancient Rome, that was a tough life and no one had any time, and then it went dark. And so like to me, it's just total bunk also. We have to value cooking. That has to be not wasted time or not time between the time we get home and the time we eat, but actually valuable time that we could spend on our phones and we could spend on doing whatever, and just cook something quickly and delicious and nutrient rich.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Got a hand up over there.
Hi, Dawn Ratner. My question is generally on the cost of things, because it's something that you sort of skirted people away from, but as far as nutrient density, everything goes back to the Farm Bill, and it's not something that should really just sort of be skirted over. And so my question is, how can you discuss all of this without just touching on the cost of everything nutrient dense is affected by politics?
It's an awesome point, and I think we have to, and to Spike's point, et cetera, we have to invest in that piece. And I think there's the potential for an organic checkoff, which would, and there are other things that could come about where we could see investment in different types of agriculture, as Dan Glickman was talking about, I think is so phenomenal. For my part of it, I just teach people that a lot of times that, fully prepared, ready to eat in the grocery store, while it seems convenient, a lot of the things that you're getting there, or you're paying for the cost of somebody doing all of that. And so, I will break things down and say, first of all, the freezer is one of the healthiest spots in the kitchen for you. And it is, I do frozen organic vegetables because organic is important to me, but I will also say to somebody, if they don't have access to organic, you can have the frozen vegetables there. If you have them there, you're more likely to cook with them. I just randomly threw cauliflower into my eggs this morning because I had cauliflower, I just got home, I had cauliflower in the freezer and I didn't have any other vegetables. So I think we have to look at that piece, and I think we have to look at the cost, but we also have to be careful not to make cost the rationale for why we're eating poorly. So I think that piece of it is, and then the other part is I'm loving seeing a lot of the collaborations that companies are doing with, I'll use the Tom Shoe model, which is sort of like the one-to-one, but where there's a juice shop in Los Angeles that is also putting their juice shop now into a very poor neighborhood, and they're making the juice there free, and they're paying for it by way of both a better waste, but use of the ugly fruit, we'll call it, or some of the less pretty, because who cares if you're making it into a juice, and they're also paying for it because, out of their success of the funds from their other stores. And I think we have to do that until we see the policies catch up with what we know we need to see in this country.
And it's critical to look beyond the Farm Bill. This is a question of social equity. Why aren't people paid enough to feed themselves well? And as a population, the United States spends less of their percentage on our income, our disposable income, than any other developed country in the world. And we pay less as a percentage of our income for food than we did during the Great Depression. So in terms of prioritization, in terms of justice, in terms of policy, I think we really need to look not only to what ends up in our plate, but the funds that end up in our pocket. So we have time for one more question. We have 1 minute and 8 seconds. Yes.
Okay. So we have time for one more question.
Yes.
This is Yogesh from Lettuce Networks, and we are putting vegetable farms in people's backyards and creating kind of a hyper-local food economy in neighborhoods. And my question is for Ari. The plant blindness. I mean, we have kids who we interact with, and they say, "Cauliflower from a garden? I thought it was made in a factory." Have you observed that, and how do you deal with plant blindness when it comes to edible foods or food?
That's a great question. I have 30 seconds to answer it. It depends where you are. So I used to take New York University students around Italy, and I would say, "Let's eat a fig off this tree," and they'd go, "No way, it's not wrapped in plastic on a shell." And I would go, "Just taste it, please," and done. But not everybody has that. At the U.S. Botanic Garden, what we do is we work very closely with some community-based organizations. A great one in D.C. is called Live It, Learn It, that brings especially students, and the younger the better, from the most at-risk schools into the garden, where we can do hands-on activities, and we always finish them with a nutritious, nutrient-dense meal. And my time's up.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. Thanks.